I'd like to begin by thanking all of you for joining us today and welcome you to Decisions, What Policymakers Need to Know About Cost-Benefit Analysis. This webinar is presented by the Cost-Benefit Knowledge Bank for Criminal Justice, a project of the Vera Institute of Justice. I'm Sarah Galgano, Policy Analyst with the Cost-Benefit Analysis Unit at the Vera Institute of Justice. And we are very excited to have Craig Prins joining us today to lead our discussion. Craig is the Executive Director of the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission. He was appointed to the position in 2004 after serving as counsel for Oregon's House and Senate Judiciary Committees. Prior to entering the world of sentencing and criminal justice policy, Craig served as Deputy Director of Oregon's Department of Public Safety Standards and Training and was a Deputy District Attorney in Multnomah County, Oregon. Craig also serves as the Vice President of the National Association of Sentencing Commissions Executive Committee. This webinar is sponsored by the Cost-Benefit Knowledge Bank, a project of the Vera Institute of Justice and the Bureau of Justice Assistance. The Cost-Benefit Knowledge Bank aims to broaden and deepen the understanding and use of cost-benefit analysis in criminal justice by helping practitioners and jurisdictions build their capacity to conduct cost-benefit studies and apply cost-benefit analysis to policymaking. For today's presentation, I will begin by explaining how the webinar process works and then launch into a brief overview of cost-benefit analysis. Craig will follow with a discussion about how cost-benefit analysis can be used to inform decision-making and provide us with a real-world example of how CBA has been incorporated into policymaking in his home state of Oregon. Craig will then talk about the questions that typically arise about a cost-benefit analysis results based on his experience using CBA in justice policy making. Following this section, I will discuss how CBA can address the questions that are frequently asked about policy options. And then finally, we'll wrap up with a question and answer section where we will take questions from you, the audience. So we'll start off with a few housekeeping items. Please note the chat section on the bottom left side of your screen. If you're watching the webinar in full screen mode, you will need to exit the full screen mode to access the chat feature. Please use this chat box to send questions to us throughout the presentation. We will queue up your questions for the Q&A session at the end of the hour, and we have also reserved time for a few questions at the end of each section of the presentation. If you need technical support, please use one of the following options. You can either type your question into the chat box, or you can call or email the ReadyTalk support line, and ReadyTalk is our webinar host today. Also, please note that today's presentation is being recorded and will be available from the Cost-Benefit Knowledge Bank at cbkb.org along with the PowerPoint slides. Our goal today is to inform you about how cost-benefit results can be used in criminal justice policymaking, provide you with an example of how this has been done in Oregon, identify the questions that you should ask when presented with CBA results, and lastly, to discuss the ways that cost-benefit analysis can address questions relevant to policy outcomes. Before we get started with the presentation, we have a couple of poll questions we'd like you to answer so we can get to know you a little better. First, we'd like to know what type of agency you work in. Please check the appropriate bubble. Great. We'll give this a few more seconds for results to come in. So it looks like we have a very nice mixture of participants today, quite a few from the government field and quite a few from the nonprofit. So let's move on. We'd also like to know how many of you have previously used cost-benefit results for decision-making or planning. Please check the appropriate bubble. And we'll give this a few more seconds. So it looks like we have pretty close to an even split here between yes and no. Regardless of your familiarity with cost-benefit analysis, we hope you'll find today's presentation informative and useful in your field. So we will go ahead and start the presentation by providing you with a brief background on the basics of cost-benefit analysis. So to begin with, what is cost-benefit analysis? Cost-benefit analysis, or CBA, is a type of economic analysis that compares the costs and benefits of various programs and policies. CBA also allows for the inclusion of multiple stakeholder perspectives, can present a picture of the policy option over a long time horizon, uses dollars as the common term of measurement, and what truly sets CBA apart from other forms of economic analysis is that CBA allows you to compare programs and policies that have different outcomes since the benefits and costs are always expressed in dollar terms. Cost-benefit analysis can inform justice policy decisions by providing policymakers with the information they need to weigh the pros and cons of alternative investments, and it also allows policymakers to identify policy options that are not only cost-effective, but that also yield the greatest net social benefits. Cost-benefit analysis requires the following 5 steps. First, assessing the impact of the initiative by determining if the program or policy accomplishes the desired outcome, such as reducing recidivism or substance abuse. This is done either through direct measurement or looking to evaluations of similar programs. Second, determining whose perspectives will be included in the analysis. This is necessary because criminal justice initiatives can affect many groups, including taxpayers, victims, and participants. Because criminal justice policies often have a rippling effect, it's important to determine whose perspectives will be included in the analysis from the outset. Third, measuring the costs and benefits of the initiative in dollars. This is done by attaching a dollar value to the cost of the program and to the benefits that accrue to whomever's perspectives are included in the analysis. The fourth step is comparing the costs and benefits of the initiative over the long run to determine whether the benefits outweigh the costs. It may also be worthwhile to examine whether the initiative delivers a higher or lower return on investment than other alternative options. The final step of cost-benefit analysis is assessing the reliability of the study's results. The focus of today's webinar is what happens at step 5. That is, to answer the question of, now that I have the results, what do I do with them? To this end, we'll discuss how the results can and have been used in Oregon, what kind of questions you should ask when you are presented with a CBA, and then the final portion of the presentation will delve into the methods that a CBA can and should use to address frequently asked questions. So now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Craig, who will begin by discussing how cost-benefit analysis can be used to inform justice policymaking. Craig?
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to Vera for asking me to be the speaker on this. I was really pleased to see that a lot of the listeners have already used this kind of analysis, and some folks haven't, so I think it's a good mix and we can have a good discussion, so I'm looking forward to that. The first thing that I wanted to just state on the outset is in the area of criminal justice policy, you always have to start, I think, and acknowledge that criminal justice policy is multifaceted. In Oregon, for example, we have in our Constitution that the principles of criminal justice are accountability for one's actions, personal responsibility, and those are kind of to pay for the past, meaning, people who hurt or abuse or kill or steal, they have to pay for that. And that's kind of a past-oriented part of criminal justice. The future-oriented part of criminal justice policy in our Constitution is enshrined as reformation of the individual and protection of society. And it's those two future-oriented principles of criminal justice that cost-benefit analysis can really inform. Justice policy then can be for other, on those two principles of reformation and protection of society, there's multiple goals. You could be looking at deterrence at the front end with policing. You could look at recidivism reduction, which is what we're going to talk about today. But you're always, I think for those of you who haven't used a cost-benefit tool before, I would say, we're all of us who are in this policy area, we're asked, what's the best place to put a resource? And when you're doing that, you're thinking about improving public safety cost effectively. Where's the best return on investment? What's the best benefit? What's the bang for your buck? All of those questions, whether you use a tool or not, are really using cost-benefit analysis. And the cost-benefit analysis tool that we are going to talk about, it just monetizes that and makes it a more business-like decision by investing some time in developing some of those costs and benefits, and I'll show you what I mean. Just to give you a perspective of how we've built this capacity for cost-benefit analysis in Oregon. Sarah mentioned I'm the director of Oregon's Criminal Justice Commission, and I feel like I'm well suited to use cost-benefit analysis, and I'll explain why. We really have four tasks or fourfold mission of the CJC. One of them is just to improve the efficiency of Oregon's public safety and criminal justice systems at the state and local level. And again, I think from what we just talked about, you can see that that's exactly what cost-benefit analysis does. It tries to make a business-like decision possible to use your resources efficiently, to reduce crime. So you can say, our goal is one less crime, one less victim, and here's how we made our decisions. The Oregon Criminal Justice Commission is also the sentencing guidelines administrating agency for Oregon. And then, so we're very tuned into sentencing and the costs of prisons. And then we also are the Statistical Analysis Center, or SAC, for Oregon. We provide data on criminal justice issues to the federal government. And last but not least, we are the state administering agency for the Bureau of Justice Assistance Grants, or JAG grants. In other words, we do have some resources that are the governor's discretionary portion of those grants that we can invest as we see fit, really, with the governor's approval and my commission's direction to really make the investments that we think are the wisest. So what we began to do is we began to look at developing cost-benefit, basically because we saw the amazing work that Steve Ose and the folks at the Washington State Institute of Public Policy had done. They've done an amazing job of looking at meta-analysis, looking at a bunch of research done over years, and really pulling out the research that's rigorous enough to be relied on. It has enough internal validity to have external validity, that we can say, hey, that worked here, let's try it over there. So we really wanted to use that, and so as we saw what they were doing, we developed a Oregon model, and you can see the link at the bottom, which basically we spent a lot of time understanding the costs of our criminal justice system. How much does it cost to make an arrest? How much does it cost when a person is placed on probation after a formal conviction? A lot of the work of the tool is really delving into those costs. Some folks are also familiar that Oregon had, the Oregon legislature passed a bill called Senate Bill 267 in 2003. I was counsel for the Judiciary Committee at that time that passed that bill. And that actually directs agencies that are investing money, state general fund dollars, it directs those agencies to use at least 75% of those funds should be directed at evidence-based programs. And they have to be evidence-based programs that are cost-effective. So we really used WISIP's work and to make sure we were following that. I believe in this. I don't look at this as a mandate from the legislature. I look at this as the right way to proceed and make good decisions. So for all those reasons, we developed this capacity to do cost-benefit analysis. Really, when you look at cost-benefit analysis, I want to just explain how we did this. So we had a reentry council that was started by our governor, and the reentry council and several legislators and the governor had all expressed a desire to me to invest in the area of reentry. And I thought that made sense, but I wanted to have a little more, a better or more formal understanding of what I could expect and what I could explain would be the probable outcomes of that. So I looked at the WISIP tool. I looked at how many studies had been done on reentry, what type of things seemed to have worked based upon a rigorous evaluation. And I thought about, well, how is that going to translate to Oregon? We've got 36 counties. We've got Portland, Oregon, Eugene, Oregon, Salem, Oregon, which was where most of our population is. We've got very rural counties where we've got counties that are pretty strapped for dollars in this recession. And I wanted to think about how can I guide our investment in reentry to something that makes sense. And we wanted to do our best we could to make a good decision. So this is a excerpt from one of the Washington State Institute of Public Policy studies. And you can see along this, what they're looking at is, you can see in blue, they've studied different types of interventions. They've looked at the meta-analysis from across the country and in the English language, really. And so you can see they've studied drug treatment in the community. They've studied drug treatment in the prisons. And that was really an area that my folks in Oregon said we had a gap, where a lot of times an offender who was receiving drug treatment the last 6 months of his prison sentence was not going to receive that treatment in the community after release. And the folks were saying that's where they wanted to consider an investment, or wanted me to consider an investment of the burn JAG dollars. And I looked at these evaluations where you can see WISIP has studied that. They've looked at the evaluations around the country. They've established an effect size, what you can expect as a recidivism reduction if you make these type of investments. And you can see that they've studied treatment in prisons in the communities. And so really, as we were wrestling with what's the best investment decision for our state, we really realized we had some good, strong evidence that a reentry system that leveraged that treatment that people received in prison with continued treatment services once they hit the community and returned to their communities would be a wise investment. And so I think from that you can see, you look at what, are there evaluations out there that say this works? Yes, that's the first step. What is our problem statement here in Oregon? Well, we have an investment we're making in prisons that's not being maximized because it's not continued once guys release out. And then we knew always when you're dealing with drug treatment, there's so many other services that you want to provide along with that. We wanted to make sure for those who have co-occurring disorders that we were providing mental health services, that we had ancillary services like employment counseling and education. And I think Oregon is really a leader on using our probation or post-prison supervision folks here have really done a good job of trying to use the risk needs responsivity model. And so I felt good about our supervision services. I thought we would have these type of things would be available. And so we wrote up a grant for about $2 million to have counties bid for with a direction that we would pay for these kind of continuing services out of prison. We then gave it some time to see how we were doing. Of course, I guess this is the second step. So we picked an area to invest in, and that's really the first step. What's a good, wise front-end place? But as Sarah said, place to invest. But as Sarah said, we really wanted to get beyond that. And so I asked my researchers to do what I think is what we all should do, is do an outcome evaluation of those investments. So we had 4 counties that we wanted to evaluate how that investment was really panning out in terms of recidivism and recidivism reduction. Really, we wanted to look at the costs of the different counties, because some of them were rural counties, and one of them was Portland, Oregon, Multnomah County. And we just wanted to track, if our purpose is reducing recidivism, and we made a front-end decision that I think was a well-based decision based upon the evaluations. But I believe you want to always follow up and see, did the offenders in Oregon, did those who received these services, did they reoffend less than those who didn't? And really then, once you have that information from your own evaluation, you can measure the benefits specific to your own state with the tool I had mentioned that really monetizes some of the costs of crime and dealing with crime. So there's a link to our reentry evaluation on this slide, but we do have the analytical ability to look at that investment. I've got staff who can do that. So they set up a treatment and control study to look at the 4 counties. They did a matched pair study, so they looked at offenders who had released before the services were available as the control group, and they compared it to the treatment group in those 4 counties. We knew that wasn't the most rigorous evaluation. Of course, the most rigorous would be a random control trial. We elected not to do that in this situation for pragmatic reasons. But we did our best, and I think you'll see in the evaluation, we did our best to make sure that those who are recidivating, in the time before the services were available, were really a comparable group and recidivated at the same level. So we felt good about our treatment and control group, and then we compared the two, and we saw a 27% reduction in recidivism for the treatment group, and then my economist who developed the Oregon tool can then translate that into the number of convictions that were avoided per every 10 participants. You can see a lot of cost-benefit analysis is a long view, looking over a 10-year period. We wanted to monetize the cost of that investment, so we monetize it as an average of $3,400 per participant. We knew that would vary with the different counties based upon the scale we were using. And then the tool we had developed with the help of the WISP, it really helps you see, okay, so you reduced recidivism 27%. That's great. What does that mean in avoided costs to the taxpayers, and to me, most importantly, avoided victimization? And so cost-benefit analysis from looking at civil law cases where there are lost wages for injuries, there's medical costs, there are pain and suffering. You can monetize the avoided impact to victims when you reduce crime. And really that's so important that we keep our eyes on. That's our goal of criminal justice when we get back to that, why we're seeking reformation and is making our state safer. So then once you have the costs and you've monetized those benefits, you can give a result in a ratio of, if you spend $1, here's the benefits that we've received that we can actually see and monetize along the way that we're avoiding. The lessons we've learned, you need to make sure that you and your policymakers understand you need to do the work to get the local data. How much does it really cost here? don't just rely on what WISIP's model said was the cost in the places that they studied it and was an average. The costs are going to really vary depending on where you're doing this, and so statewide averages can be misleading is one of the things we learned. Another thing, some of our sites had good reductions in recidivism. Some of them were not as good, and this is so important. Success is not a sure thing. You can't just say, oh, I've invested the money in an evidence-based program and the savings are now just in the bank, and I just need to wait for the program, and I'm going to get that savings. Fidelity, how the program is implemented, is just so important. And my staff worked with, because it is a grant, they worked with the providers of the services on an ongoing basis to make sure that the services were being provided with fidelity to the model that we had set out. And I just think that we learned that's so important because we saw results that really varied even from the 4 counties we studied. And then this really added to the information we had to provide to the policy dialogue. The Ways and Means Committee really appreciated us putting it in the perspective of dollars. And one of the things that I really learned out of this is reentry is a really good area for investment because the avoided costs are greater. These offenders are more likely to return to prison if they recidivate. So they're deeper into the system where it's most expensive. And we really saw, when we looked at this and really compared it to other areas like where we've invested in drug courts, for example, which we think is a great investment. In drug courts, you're really avoiding, a lot of those folks are lower level drug possessors. And if you're successful with them, it's great. It's harder to monetize the avoided costs because fewer of them are likely going to end up in prison. Whereas reentry, that was one of the things we learned is just you could monetize, avoiding a return to prison. So that's some of the lessons we learned, and I hope there's questions, and I'll just hand it back to Sarah.
Great. Thank you, Craig. I think we have time to take maybe one quick question here. If we aren't able to address your question right now, keep in mind, please keep sending them to us. We'll queue them up for later. Craig, can you speak from Oregon's experience with CBA about how far into the future Oregon typically projects benefits, i.e. 1 year, 5 years?
Yeah, it's a great question. We tend to do a 10-year horizon, but we also try to do it, looking not only at the 10-year horizon, but at the earlier in time. I really feel like when we develop that, we want to have the investor, and that's how we think of the policymaker, we want them to try to think as much as they can that this is an investment, it's a long-term decision, and if you get a reduction in recidivism, you can see that that's going to have, like Sarah said, a ripple effect down the road. So we try to use a 10-year horizon, but we're cognizant that we also have to put it in terms, so we'll look at it multiple ways, 1 year, 5 year, 10 years.
Great. Thanks, Craig. Why don't we move on to discuss CBA and decision making?
Thank you. The thing that I wanted to say on this part, it's so important that you consider the pros and cons of investments in some kind of systematic way. This is an opportunity to really change this from an intuitive decision to really have a more comprehensive look at the cost of the system and the avoided crime you can expect. And it really is, I think, is needed to balance the more short-term or even parochial interests where you're only thinking about what are the costs to my budget, my jail, my area that I care about. We really need to be able to have a tool that looks across the whole system, and I think this tool does. And it just allows us to make more business-like decisions than intuition what's the latest fad, and it really gives us a better opportunity. If you think of our system as a nonprofit, where we're not motivated by a profit goal, but we are motivated by keeping our folks safe. This is a way to make a business-like decision to do that. I wanted to go over some of the frequently asked questions, things that decision makers, I think, and I can speak to this from being a lawyer and for the legislature that makes a lot of the investment decisions. How can I believe the results? Are the results guaranteed? Who gets the benefits? What are the alternatives? So I think it's super important to think about these and the things that folks are going to ask you. I think I've shown that can I believe the results? I think it's so important to not just look at the meta-analysis that WISA puts up there. I think that's a starting point, and that's an important, if you haven't done that, I'd encourage you to do that. But we really think you should study. You're going to learn so much as you study your own translation or investment. The costs, we've gone over that, how different they can be in different places. And then Sarah's going to explain the sensitivity analysis, and I think we use that internally with a CJC, and Sarah can talk about that. We just feel that the more detail we provide, the more transparency we give, we found that really helps people to understand and see what we're doing and believe in the results that we're providing. And it's been effective. Like I said, the Ways and Means chair, I can tell you, last session was very appreciative, and I think it helped my budget for my agency as we move forward. Are the results guaranteed? One of the things that we're asked. No. No one has a crystal ball. You're dealing with people who are in running these programs in different locations throughout your jurisdiction. You're dealing with offenders. You're giving them an opportunity to change their behavior. But it's just like a stock market portfolio would say, past performance does not guarantee future results. So the fact that there's been multiple evaluations in other places to show that this has worked, that just gives you a good basis to make the decision, but it is not a guarantee. You want to make sure you understand how to measure the effect in each place if you can. And then the costs and benefits of the policy effect, they can be hard to monetize. It makes people nervous when you're monetizing avoided victimization, when I talk about people being hurt and things with dollars. But that's an opportunity to give a consistent look across the system at avoiding victimization. So I think it's important. Who gets the benefits? This is a really important one too. The return on investment is both to the government and to society, and these can be presented separately. I think so for your budget writers, they might want you to just look at the taxpayer systemic costs that are avoided, or they might want to focus on the victimization. Some of them will be long-term. And I think the key is for your budget writers and your policymakers, that budget savings can be, that's realized when you have less crime, when you're reducing recidivism. They can spend that on other areas. It gives them more flexibility if we can demonstrate that this is saving taxpayer dollars. When we looked at this, who gets the benefits, we saw, and my economist could monetize, a 1% drop in recidivism out of prison resulted in $4.3 million avoided in annual cost to victims and taxpayers. And that was really important to help people understand who gets the benefits and that we could monetize them. And so then the last thing I wanted to say at this part of the webinar is just, I always come back to this. If you're just thinking about using a tool or spending some time, investing in staff resources or time and looking at cost-benefit analysis tools, what's your alternative? You have to think about how you make these choices now. And really, then you look at what cost-benefit analysis really does at the end of the day is it gives you a good way to compare my programmatic investment that I have made or I'm considering making, comparing it to business as usual. What's happening without this investment? And that, as you begin to do this, and you look at the WISP tool and other areas, this can really give you a better and more systemic way to make decisions. And so with that, I think I'll just hand it back to Sarah.
Great, thanks, Craig. And we'll have time to take another quick question here before we move on. Again, please keep the questions coming. We're getting a lot of really great ones. So Craig, someone asked whether you've used a convicted person's past history of crime commission to estimate the number of new crimes avoided.
That's a great question. Yes, we've done that, but most of the time we found you have to average the costs avoided. So we've looked at individuals, and we always try to focus our investments to those who are moderate or high risk to recidivate. So we make sure that the investment is going to those folks based on the risk principle of the risk, needs, and responsivity that I mentioned earlier. So I would say yes, we try to look at the individual offender's likelihood to recidivate, and we're guided by the risk principle to focus our resources on those moderate to high risk to recidivate.
Great, thanks, Craig. So now we're going to turn the presentation to a discussion about how cost-benefit analysis can be used to address questions about policy options and the details you should look for in a cost-benefit analysis. So as Craig mentioned, there are questions that people often ask about cost-benefit results, and we're going to now talk about how CBA can address these questions. So when it comes to whether the results should be believed and if they are guaranteed, as Craig had mentioned, the reliability of cost-benefit results are contingent upon the quality of the inputs of the analysis. A rigorous analysis will use sensitivity analysis to kick the tires on the results and analyze how sensitive the results are to the estimates and judgments included in the analysis. Some techniques that can be looked to answer these questions are base case scenario, partial sensitivity analysis, break-even analysis, and others that we'll discuss shortly. CBA should also discuss to whom the benefits and costs accrue by delineating by taxpayer, victim, and participant perspectives. And finally, CBAs can be prepared on a variety of policy or program options to answer the question of what are the alternative policy or program options and how do they compare. To illustrate how CBA can answer questions 1 through 3, we will refer several times to an example of a hypothetical prison education program that seeks to reduce the number of individuals who commit new crimes post-release. In this example, estimations of the program's impact on recidivism are based on evaluations of similar programs because information on the impact of the prison education program was not available. These findings have shown that similar programs in other states have reduced recidivism by an average of 15%, and costs are equal $10,000. A CBA can earn the trust of the reader by documenting why base case assumptions were chosen and using partial sensitivity analysis to illustrate how the results vary if the assumptions are wrong. So the base case scenario is the outcome that is most likely to happen. Base case scenarios are either based on direct evaluation of the program's realized outcomes or evaluation of similar programs. Using our hypothetical example, based on an evaluation of similar programs, a cost-benefit analysis performed on the prison education program assumes that the intervention will reduce recidivism by 15% over 3 years. Based on that assumption, as you can see, the CBA estimates a net benefit, which is the total benefits minus total costs, of $7,000. As I said, the base case scenario provides information on the best estimate of the expected net benefits of the initiative. Ideally, the base case scenario will have been based on an impact evaluation of the initiative of interest. However, there are a number of reasons this may not be feasible, such as when you are examining a program that has not yet been implemented, or if the program has only been implemented for a short amount of time. If direct evaluation of the program isn't feasible, the base case scenario should be based on evaluations of similar programs. Regardless of which method is used, the base case scenario should be accompanied by an explanation of what assumptions were used to arrive at the explanation. Partial sensitivity analysis. Partial sensitivity analysis illustrates how much CBA results change in response to changes in a variable that is subject to uncertainty, or in other words, a variable that we lack complete confidence in. Say you're concerned that there's a chance that the prison education program may not achieve a reduction in recidivism in your jurisdiction, similar to that found in other evaluations, because your locality is significantly different from the evaluation locations. Partial sensitivity analysis can show you how the expected net benefits will change in response to different levels of recidivism. So as you can see from the table shows you the results of a partial sensitivity analysis. You can see that a 20% reduction in recidivism would lead to a net benefit of $12,000 per participant. A 5% reduction in recidivism would result in a net cost of $2,000 per participant. And a 5% increase in recidivism would generate a net cost of $12,000 per participant. So partial sensitivity analysis provides you with information on how variation from the base case scenario will affect the expected net benefits from an initiative. The results of a partial sensitivity analysis illustrate just what happens if estimations included in the analysis are imprecise. It does this by selecting the variable of interest and changing its value while holding any other variables constant. Referring back to our prison program, this was done by changing the levels of recidivism and testing how sensitive our net benefits would be if we had either over or underestimated recidivism levels. Are the results guaranteed? The results of a cost-benefit analysis are not a guarantee of future conditions, but CBA can help you address uncertainty by reporting the policy effect necessary for the costs of the program to equal the benefits, reporting the best case and worst case scenarios to give policymakers an idea of what the range of possible effects could be, and by using Monte Carlo simulation to model the probability of potential net benefits. So while cost-benefit analysis can't provide surefire guarantees, it can provide you with a pretty good picture of what future conditions would look like under the policy. Break-even analysis. By definition, breaking even results in a monetary net benefit of $0. Using our hypothetical prison program, break-even analysis can be used to determine how much recidivism levels must decrease to make the policy economically neutral. In this example, the program would need to reduce recidivism by 10% for the program costs to equal the benefits. As stated, break-even analysis provides information on how great the policy's impact must be for the program to break even. Now, if exceeding the break-even point is feasible, the benefits are likely to outweigh the costs. If reaching the break-even point is not feasible, the costs are likely to exceed the benefits. Break-even analysis is particularly useful when the program can't be directly evaluated or when you can't look to other similar evaluations. Best case, worst case scenario analysis shows you what the upper or best case and lower or worst case boundaries of a cost-benefit study's results. For the prison education program, the best case scenario, when accounting only for the impact on recidivism, might be that recidivism decreases by 20%. This would yield a net benefit of $12,000 per participant. The worst case might be that the program actually increases recidivism by 5%, which would generate a net cost of $12,000 per participant. Best case, worst case scenario analysis can provide policymakers with information about how a broad range of a policy's possible outcomes affect the bottom line. A best case analysis is based on all of the most favorable assumptions about the program or policy's outcomes, whereas a worst-case analysis uses the least favorable assumptions. When looking at best-case and worst-case results, bear in mind that these scenarios are extreme cases and the odds of them happening are low. Now say that there's uncertainty around several estimations used in the analysis. The methods previously described, while sufficient to assess the uncertainty associated with a CBA, are unable to account for all of the factors that may affect a study's results. Monte Carlo analysis is often used in CBA to examine the range of possible outcomes and the associated probability that the outcome will occur. The column titled Measured Risk on this graphic shows the results of a Monte Carlo analysis. This column tells you, for each program that the Washington State Institute of Public Policy examined, what the odds are of achieving a positive net present value, meaning the odds that the benefits will outweigh the costs. So to look at a couple examples here, the way you'd read this column is that the benefits of the Offender Reentry Community Safety Program, the very top one, are projected to outweigh the costs 100% of the time. Or the benefits of the drug offender sentencing alternative will outweigh the costs of the drug offender sentencing alternative will outweigh the benefits 78% of the time. So as we stated, Monte Carlo analysis provides information about the probability that outcomes will occur by examining multiple variables simultaneously and simulating thousands of scenarios. The results of the analysis show a range of possible results and their associated probabilities. For a more in-depth explanation of Monte Carlo analysis, please watch the recording of the September 13th webinar, Sensitivity Analysis for Cost-Benefit Studies of Justice Policies, on cbkb.org. So who gets the benefits? Since criminal justice initiatives can affect many groups, it's important that stakeholders in the policy or initiative agree on whose perspectives will be included before the analysis has even begun. If more than one group's perspectives are included in the analysis, benefits and costs should be presented separately to provide clarity on how the benefits are accrued. Otherwise, a lot of information will be lost in translation. For our hypothetical prison program, we've delineated costs and benefits by taxpayer, victim, and participant perspectives so that the results are more easily digestible. As the table illustrates, taxpayers bear the $10,000 cost of the program, but they're not the only group that benefits from the program. Past and potential future victims will benefit from reduced levels of recidivism in terms of reduced fear of crime, decreased pain and suffering, and so on. Additionally, participants themselves also benefit from the program in terms of increased educational attainment and employability. Pardon me. CBA should answer the question of who is getting the benefits by reporting the costs and benefits for each perspective or stakeholder in the analysis so that it is easily understood to whom the benefits are accruing. The anticipated outcomes for perspectives that were not measured quantitatively should be discussed within the analysis qualitatively so that you can easily understand all of the possible outcomes and how they affect each group. To examine how a policy compares to alternative options, CBAs can be performed on multiple policies to provide a menu of options. So going back to our WISUP example, the table illustrates what WISUP's menu looks like. This was borrowed from the Washington State Institute of Public Policy's estimation of the monetary benefits and costs of evidence-based public policy. As you can see, the menu allows for easy comparison of the costs and benefits associated with each program, along with the odds of achieving that outcome for the various offender programs they examined. Note that this draws us back to one of the greatest benefits of CBA, its ability to compare programs with very different outcomes by using dollars as the common term of measurement. So to summarize this portion of the presentation, there are multiple ways that CBA can address commonly asked questions about the study's results. To gain your trust, a good CBA should identify the base case or most likely scenario and use partial sensitivity analysis to examine what happens to the net benefits if a single outcome estimate is uncertain. Though CBA is not a crystal ball that guarantees future conditions, the following techniques can be used to address uncertainty around estimations. reporting the policy effect necessary to break even, reporting the best and worst case scenarios so you have an idea of what the range of possible effects could be, and finally by using Monte Carlo simulation to model the probability of potential net benefits. The question of who gets the benefits can be addressed by analyzing and separating the benefits and costs accruing to the different groups or perspectives included in the analysis, and providing a menu of CBA results will allow policymakers to compare policy options. So at this point, we'd be happy to go back and take any questions. A reminder, if you have questions, please enter them in the chat box on the lower left side of your screen. And Craig, we had a question come in.
Yes.
A participant says that you appear to have a large staff to assist you with CBA. What about smaller organizations who don't have as many resources? And do you have any tips for accomplishing CBA on a shoestring?
Yeah, I don't have a large staff. I have an economist. Basically, I have two analysts, two analytical positions. I converted one of them to an economist, and so it doesn't take a lot of staff that can do this. It does take, I believe, really what it takes is having WISIP. You can start this by just looking at what the WISIP folks have. And then I have my two folks, the economist and the analyst, and I have to really leverage my partnerships with the Department of Corrections, the Oregon Youth Authority, whomever I'm working on, wherever the investment is, I work with their folks too. So I think it's no different from anything else. You gotta leverage what you've got. I think the biggest thing that makes Oregon unique is my statistical analysis center has an economist, and all I did was convert one of my research positions to an economist position because I liked that economic perspective for my policymakers that he could provide.
Great, thanks, Craig. We had another question about how much time elapsed between initial funding and outcome evaluation of your reentry program, and whether a process evaluation was done in between.
Yeah, I think if you look at the evaluation, there's a link to it. This was a preliminary evaluation. The grants were so the offenders were released from 2009 to 2011, and then we looked at a one-year outcome. So we'll have to continue to look at this, and that's one of the things that we like to do is we'll look at it with we like to look 3 years out from release. So we'll continue to look at it. And then, yes, we did a process evaluation as we went along. So I have the two analytical people, and then I have my two grant folks, and they do your normal grant management, and then also we had help from the Department of Corrections to do a process evaluation ongoing to see what was happening as it occurred and make modifications.
Great, thanks, Craig. And we have a question about what data sources you used for costs related to victimization.
They're in the study. I don't have the citation, but there's a good couple of studies that glean the costs of victimization from those civil lawsuits and those things, and so they're in the write-up that is linked in the bottom of one of these slides, and that's also what the Washington State Institute of Public Policy used.
Okay, and do you have any advice or opinions on using CBA to evaluate small-scale pilot projects?
Well, I think you should. I think it's a good idea to. I think that when you do a small-scale pilot, But to me, the notion of a pilot is that you're going to try something in one jurisdiction and see if it's scalable afterward. So I think before you would decide if it was whether you would want to make it scalable, you want to see if it has a cost-benefit ratio, if the costs are worth it. So yeah, I think it's wise to do that.
Great. And then how should policymakers interpret CBA results that are perhaps less favorable than the results of Oregon's reentry program? Should they automatically disregard a program that has an anticipated return on investment of less than $1?
Less than $1, I think you want to make sure you understand what that means, which is $1 invested is going to mean $1 avoided, and the dollar you have presently, and the dollar avoided is over time. So I would be cautious of if the ratio is 1-to-1. We make other investments with our drug courts, for example. Drug courts are more expensive in many situations than a reentry center. We've done investments that have a lower ratio. So I think it's totally valid to keep those, and I wouldn't dismiss them. But I just would want you to be clear to understand what a ratio of 1-to-1 would mean. And I would have serious questions about continuing that, and I would look at how can we change this program, or is it time to look at another area to invest in?
Okay, great. It looks like we have time for maybe one more quick question. Our emails are up here on the screen. If we didn't get a chance to answer your question, please feel free to email Craig or myself. And the question is, law enforcement officers are often skeptical of researchers. Do you have any advice on how to bridge that gap?
Yes. Find a researcher who is a police officer. So I think there are folks who have crossed over from being sworn officers into the area of research. I think that's one area. I think also finding a good chief that is trusted by his community, who is using cost-benefit analysis and research is important. And then I think you need to help them understand that you understand that translating it to the street is difficult. And I think if you help them boil it down to say, science is common sense boiled down into a way that you can share it with others. So I think you have to really think about how you're communicating it, boil it down for them, acknowledge that they know more than you do about how things work on the street, and find a good champion. And I think you'll go a long way toward it.
Great. Thanks, Craig. So we're going to start wrapping up here. As a reminder, today we covered how CBAs are used by decision makers to inform policymaking, the questions that policymakers often ask about CBA results, and how CBA can answer these questions that are frequently asked. We hope you'll take away from the presentation that CBAs are a useful decision tool, that CBA results should not be viewed as definitive, but that rigorous CBAs can handle many questions you may have about their results and add important information to the dialogue. So I'd like to remind everyone to please fill out the evaluation form before logging out of the webinar. We're constantly striving to improve, and your feedback helps us do so. Craig, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks. As I said, Craig and my contact information are listed here if you have any further questions or if we weren't able to get to your question. I'd also like to remind you that the PowerPoint and audio from today's presentation will be posted at cbkb.org. This project has been presented by cbkb.org, a project of the Vera Institute of Justice, funded by the Bureau of Justice Assistance. And thank you all very much for joining us today.